Hello, my name is Horrorama, and today I have found 7 very strange stories of people's encounters with mysterious beings and dangerous people, and will be narrating them here. If you end up enjoying my narrations, then please do consider liking and subscribing to my channel, as that really does help a lot. But without any further ado, let's get into the narrations. The first story has been posted by user Rock275. I'm a former, long-time airborne ranger, having served for many years in the Washington state. After my service, I was a Forest Service firefighter and disaster response contractor. Suffice to say, I am very experienced and professionally trained. In 2019, I was hiking in the Weyerhaeuser Forest Reserve near Offutt Lake in western Washington state. The preserve was adjacent to the home of a buddy's father, and before setting off into the lumber preserve, his father had implored for me not to go hiking in there alone, as it was a very dangerous area and a very frightening area. He had lived there for 30 years and refused to let his kids ever step foot into the forest. Being a young, confident ranger, I laughed off his superstition and headed out into the virgin forest. It was an unusually hot and humid day in late spring, and I was armed with a Glock 19 pistol and feeling very capable and competent. I had made it about 3 miles into the forest and came to a massive bowl section of perfectly manicured pine forest with no undergrowth, just tan spruce pine needle bed as far as the eye could see. It looked like I was stepping down into a forest bowl the size of a modern football stadium. I got about halfway down the bowl, and literally every sound in the forest became totally, deafeningly silent. All in an instant. It was as though I had stepped into a soundproof studio room in one step. No bugs, no wind, no ambient sounds, nothing. By this time, I had been to combat twice and graduated ranger school and was a pretty salty individual. But I am not ashamed to admit that I was overcome with a feeling of fear, dread, and deep, guttural, paralyzing fear. I gathered myself together and turned around and practically ran the entire way back to Curtis's father's house, got in my truck, and left, and never came back. I've spent years thinking about what happened in those woods, and to this day, I have no answers. I was completely sober, fully aware of my surroundings, and in good spirits and health at the time, with no mental, physical, or psychological issues. I cannot say what the incident was caused by, but I have never been so deeply in fear in my entire life. Even thinking about it now, over a decade later, makes me feel uneasy, as though whatever was in that forest is still here with me. The second story has been posted by user ticket 6634. In the fall of 1998, I went to Somerset, Vermont, to go camping along the Somerset River. A forest road runs up to an airfield with free dispersed campsites. It was first come first serve, and in the summertime it would be packed with kids partying and living their best lives. Still, my girlfriend and I planned this trip in the fall because then the fall leaves in Vermont are something special to see, and we knew the campground would be empty in the middle of the work week during the off season. I set up our tent and we walked around the woods down to the river and just enjoyed the season's natural beauty. We lay in the tent, talking as the sun went down, and drifted off to sleep. Sometime in the night, I woke up to two voices outside the tent. It sounded like two men whispering to each other, but it wasn't in English. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but distinctly heard two male voices. Suddenly, there was a long, low whistle from off in the distance, and I heard one of the men make a click sound in acknowledgement. Everything was quiet after that. I waited until sunrise and went outside the tent and looked around. I did not see anyone. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was wide awake. I woke my girlfriend up, and we both left. I still wonder where those guys came from, and why they used whistling and clicking sounds to communicate. The Somerset campground is far off the beaten path, and I didn't hear or see any signs of a vehicle. Rural Vermont has a lot of strange legends and folklore. Years after this happened, I learned about the Bennington Triangle and the disappearances of people in the 1950s. I left the state and joined the army a few months later. I've only been back to Vermont a few times since that, but I never camped there again. The third story has been posed by user Booger Cookie. This was an experience that probably happened when I was a kid, about 8 to 10 years old. I'm 22 now, for reference. There used to be this park in the summers my dad would take me to. He would play basketball in the section where the courts were, and I would play in the section with the park equipment. One day, I was on a swing set, and this couple came up and started talking to me. There was a man and a woman with a black stroller. I don't think I ever saw a baby in the stroller though. I remember it always being faced away from me. This may have been a normal interaction, and eventually interactions, but something felt very off or like dreamlike about the encounters. I was even able to pick up on it at that age. The man in the couple was wearing blue jeans and a red and white plaid shirt, but he looked odd, like kind of clammy, pale, or gray, I guess. I also remember his eyes being very penetrating. The woman had a dress on, and I think had medium-length brown hair. I cannot remember her face, no matter how hard I try though. She looked more normal, however, at least from what I remember. The best way to describe the man's hair would be a kind of blonde, ashen, and artificial looking. kind of sticky up, lots of flyaways, and in a sort of bowl cut style. I can't remember exactly what we talked about, but I think it revolved around God and religion, and it was a fairly short interaction, probably about 10 minutes. The weirder part is that I saw them later at a completely different park, at a completely different date. Could have been weeks or even months. And they were in the exact same outfits, with the exact same stroller. It almost looked like only 5 minutes had passed, but it was a completely different location and a different time. I can remember feeling apprehensive and off when I saw them again. Strangely, I cannot remember if I talked to them or not a second time. The last key to the story is that when I told my dad about seeing this couple multiple times as a kid, he said that maybe they were angels, and I remember that intensely freaking me out for some reason. Now, there could be a perfectly rational explanation for this, but more recently, I've been doing more spiritual work and growth, as well as scientific, astrophysical, biological, quantum physics, etc., and other similar research. And this memory resurfacing prompted me to share it. It's not the first time I recall this happening, but it is the first time I feel like I could maybe get some explanation. Aliens, interdimensional beings, or maybe something else. The fourth story has been posted by user Fuck You Asshole 1846. To set things up, me, 19 female, and my boyfriend, 26 male, both have extensive experience in the woods. I hiked across the Pacific Crest National Trail from Ashland to the Bridge of the Gods at the border of Washington, and that took 6 weeks. I've always enjoyed the outdoors, and I've never felt unsafe, even when getting close to wildlife such as bears. My boyfriend grew up in a rural area surrounded by farmland, so he's also comfortable with the outdoors. We decide to go camping at a lake, which is about 45 minutes away from Yakima, Washington, and this region of Washington has an abundance of Native American land, history, and Native people, of course. Not sure if it's relevant, but thought I'd add it. We end up getting to the lake at about 10:45 p.m. As we pull into the entrance, I immediately get a bad feeling. I have only felt something like this a handful of times in my entire life. I tell my boyfriend basically, this place is giving me a bad vibe, and he says that I'm just scared of the dark, utterly dismissing my feelings. As we round a curve, I am struck with the reality that I've had a dream about this place, his car, the specific shape of the road, the light from his headlights. It wasn't deja vu. It was straight out of a dream I had when I was maybe 12 years old. I tell my boyfriend, I've dreamt about this place, everything about it. I go into more detail than that, but you get the idea. In my dream, there was a pale, creepy face with reflective eyes staring at me through the trees, and I just remember running as fast as I can from it down the road. Again, He considers what I'm saying, but ultimately disregards it. We pull up to the campsite and set up pretty fast. Maybe 15 minutes, and we've got our tent up, a fire going, and my boyfriend has a cigar lit, since he's terribly addicted to the nasty things. As we sit around the campfire, he's puffing away, and suddenly we hear this wildly loud screaming. It sounded like a group of college kids screaming their drunken asses off, but it didn't sound quite right, if that makes sense. It sounded like men and women screaming in perfect unison, the high and low screams melding together. I instantly tried to rationalize the strange sound. It was maybe a mile away, just over a hill. Moments later, we hear it again, but on the opposite direction, and it's getting closer. Now, probably a half mile away. I swear to God, it sounded more disturbing, realizing that the sound is not human at all. I don't know if it was more distorted and alien-like, or if the proximity allowed me to hear it better. We begin to quietly discuss how that sound is not normal. Neither of us, in all our years of hiking and traveling, have ever heard something remotely like that. Moments later, the sound is not further than a football field away. My boyfriend puts his cigar down, grabs his gun, and we agree to ignore it and no longer speak of it for the rest of the night. We hop in our tent and wake up to a gorgeous sunny day. His cigar was missing the next morning. We talked about it a bit that day, and it still freaks us out thinking about it. I believe that when it sounded far away, it was actually very close. These creatures have an ability to sound far away, when really they're not far at all. I heard from some people that the further they sound, the closer they are. The fifth story has been posted by user G Muds. My brother is 2 years older, and we've probably spent 10,000 hours and then some in the woods together. Whether it was building forts, BMX tracks, to LARPing and hunting. We've traveled across the US, exploring caves, canyons, cliff diving, mountain biking, camping, hunting, and etc. All this since 2016, when we get the time off. I feel like adding this is important because there's generally nothing I wouldn't do or fear when I have him by my side, but this time was different, and we both felt it. We've had our fair share of adventures and stories to tell, of all sorts, but this one has felt like a lingering stain on my memory. We were both mid-20-ish, and it was 2019, and this was probably my 5th time hunting in the area, and the first time I brought my brother along. It's a large forest area of public land that has a few country roads, which are basically 2 tracks that stretch miles through the area. We make the trip up in my truck with our tents, 3 in total, 1 for each of us, and another to change in and keep our gear in. Without making this long-winded, we set up a camp a couple of miles from the truck, which we drove for quite a few miles through the trails. Basically, middle of nowhere. Nearest main road is probably 8 to 10 miles away. We arrived late in the night, set up camp, and quickly fell asleep after a long trip. We then spent the next day scouting, tracking, and then made our way back to the camp for the night. We cooked, then ate, had some beers, and then just joked around. The night was still early, but we had a long day ahead and decided to head off for the night. Everything up to this point was normal. I was suddenly awoke to something smacking my tent and hearing my brother's voice call my name. I knew something was off. I called back to him, and he immediately unzipped my tent and made his way inside. I could tell he was disturbed when I went to ask him what's wrong, and he immediately grabbed my shoulder and told me to shush. The sun wasn't up yet, so I think it was around 4:30 to 5 a.m. We sat in my tent, and what we heard still confuses me to this day. I can only explain it as whale sounds. Different tones of extremely loud noise that I could feel throughout my body. It would come and go. There would only be a few seconds of silence in between the sounds. It would vary from high-pitched squeals and everything in between to very low sounds that had literal ground-shaking reverb. I regrettably did not think to grab my phone or record anything that was going on, because what I was hearing didn't seem real, and in the moment, I was awestruck. The sound went on until daylight started to break. I believe it was about an hour, but I'm not really sure. Neither of us spoke, and at the same time, it felt like I could feel the energy around me, almost like my body was covered in white noise, if that makes any sense. It wasn't even minutes after the sound stopped that it started to rain, and one of the craziest thunderstorms while I was camping happened. The forecast didn't predict or account for any rain the days we were going to be there prior to making the trip. All the stakes for the tent, our gear was in, completely ripped out of the ground, and both of our tents had multiple stakes ripped out as well. Those things were driven into the ground with an axe and would take some insane force to unearth even a single one. My brother dismisses it and won't even talk about it, saying it was just machinery being dragged. But at the time, we both shared the same feeling of fear and dread. Just seems odd that it was still the middle of the night, and we were so far removed from any nearby communities or industry to hear and experience this occurrence. The sixth story has been posted by user Mente_Captus. What I'm about to say will surely make me look like a crazy. When I was a child, between 4 and 5 years old, I often saw a shadow at night. A shadow that was the same size as me and moaned while screaming. This scream was a mix of a broken radio, multiple animals, a Call of Duty zombie with a low tone of an angry goat. It appeared when I pulled my head out of the blanket. His body was dark as night. His face was terrifying. Two gaping holes for his eyes, and a large, deep, and endless mouth, and a spike on top of his head. I was screaming every night until my dad picked me up to sleep in my parents' bed. This thing followed us, and my father stopped me from turning on the light. He told me, "You are brave. You don't need the light." We stayed in the dark, and I ended up falling asleep while listening to the thing's screams. A few years passed, and I was 16, and I finally saw him again. I told my father, and he believed me. He told me that he had seen it. I, however, had my doubts. I thought he wanted to scare me, so I asked him to go to another room in the house to draw this creature, and I would do the same. We had the exact same drawing, except for a few small details. It scared me, but my father didn't know any more than me. I've heard of shadow people before, but it's not really all that similar. This thing was my size when I was 5. It came to visit me when I was 21, several times during my shock and anxiety attacks. I found an image that looks like it a while ago, but I can't find any results on Google. Today, only a few years have passed, and I still have questions. My father died 7 years ago. Only I can see this thing now. The 7th story has been posted by user Cinnamon Super. When I was growing up, we lived near a town called Welty in Oklahoma. It's really not much of a town, just a tiny store, some churches, and a lot of farms. We lived off the main road, close to an area called Macabre, which is also nothing but farms and a cemetery, and not even considered to be a town. Very middle of nowhere. My family told a lot of creepy stories about this place, especially having to do with orbs and the weird deer. I do have memories of seeing orbs floating over the trees, and have no idea what those were, but I never personally saw anything else. My dad has always been a skeptic and never chimed in on these stories. He has Alzheimer's and has a great memory of the past, but a horrible short-term memory. The other day he was telling me how much he loved living out there and wished that he could still live there, And I brought up the orbs and the creepy stories my family always shared. He agreed that they were always creeped out there, but then he told me he actually saw something really odd once. He told me that one night he was sitting on the porch by himself, and a man ran through our yard wearing what looked like a deer head. Not just the antlers, but he had an entire deer's head on top of his own. He just ran through and continued on down the pitch black road. My dad didn't know what to think of it. He just told me that he thought that there were people out there who had way too much time on their hands. My mom and brother also saw what they said was a deer walking upright all the way down the road. I know deer do this, but they said that it just kept walking like that in the middle of the road. My aunt also said they passed a man who was wearing a deer's head on the road one night. There aren't streetlights in this area, so he was just standing out there in the dark road, alone, just standing there. So many strange occurrences seem to take place every single day that, to me at least, it seems unlikely they are all caused by the actions of regular people. Either there are such dangerous humans lurking in the dark depths of society, left unchecked by the law, that such mysterious events can happen seemingly every day, or it is the actions of something more paranormal. But either way, I do hope you enjoyed my narrations, but even if you didn't, I do want to wish you a good rest of your day.